The Hidden Fleet, 5 to 7 minute hook. The Galactic Council had always believed they were untouchable. For centuries, they ruled over countless star systems. Their fleets were vast, and their power unmatched. Earth was just another insignificant planet, tucked away in a small corner of the galaxy, its people no different from the hundreds of primitive species that had come before them. But today, the Council would learn the terrible truth. They had underestimated humanity. Inside the Grand Council chamber, the air was thick with whispers. Leaders from all across the galaxy sat around a massive table, their faces grim. They had just received a report from their most trusted scouts. An unknown fleet was moving toward them at an incredible speed. It wasn't just any fleet, it was massive. It had the power to destroy entire planets, and it was heading straight for the heart of the Council's territory. The lead strategist, a battle-hardened veteran, stood from his chair and approached the holoscreen. His hands trembled slightly as he zoomed in on the image. Thousands of ships, larger than any they had ever seen, were moving in perfect formation. They appeared to be human ships, but this was impossible. Humanity had never been capable of such technological feats. How is this possible? The strategist muttered to himself, unable to believe his own words. His voice echoed through the room, drawing the attention of the other council members. They, too, stared at the screen, eyes wide with disbelief. No one had expected humanity to be capable of anything like this. The council's leader, a towering figure with a calm demeanor, stood up and spoke, trying to hide the unease creeping into his voice. We've always known Earth had potential, but this changes everything. How could they have built such a fleet without our knowledge? The room fell silent as the reality of the situation began to sink in. The ships on the screen were not just large, they were built for war. Each one was a formidable dreadnought, bristling with weapons capable of wiping out entire fleets. The Council had always seen humanity as weak, barely surviving in the galaxy, but now it seemed that they had been hiding something extraordinary. One of the younger council members, a member of the Vernar race, leaned forward, her eyes narrow with suspicion. "Do we know what they're planning?" she asked, her voice sharp. The strategist shook his head. "We don't know yet, but they're moving fast, and they've bypassed every security measure we've put in place." Another council member, a cold-blooded alien from the Rigor system, sneered. "Humanity can't possibly challenge us. Their fleet is nothing more than a display of bravado. We should destroy them now before they grow any bolder." But the leader of the council was not so sure. He had lived long enough to understand the unpredictable nature of humanity. They were often underestimated, but they always found a way to surprise their enemies. He turned to the screen once more and studied the fleet. A cold chill ran down his spine as he realized that these ships were not just a threat. They were a message. "They're coming here for a reason," he said, his voice low and steady. "And I fear that when they arrive, we won't be able to stop them." The other council members exchanged worried glances. The idea of humanity, small, insignificant humanity, launching a fleet of this scale was beyond their comprehension. How could this be possible? And more importantly, why hadn't they noticed it before? Meanwhile, on Earth, the leaders of humanity were watching the situation unfold. For years, they had worked in secret, building the fleet that now approached the Council's heart. It was a fleet so large, so powerful, that even the most advanced alien civilizations would be forced to take notice. They had built it with a single purpose in mind: to send a message to the galaxy. Humanity was no longer a weak species, and they would no longer be ignored. The leaders of Earth gathered in a secure location, watching the same report that had stunned the Galactic Council. "It's time," one of them said, his voice firm. "We've waited long enough. The Council will see that we are not to be underestimated." As the camera panned over the massive fleet, now only days away from their destination, the tension in the council room grew. The leaders knew something had to be done, but they had no idea how to handle this unexpected challenge. Could they fight this force? Could they even win? As the first ships of humanity's fleet approached the Council's territory, the room was filled with a mixture of disbelief and fear. What the Council had considered a simple human planet was now the birthplace of a force that could rival their power. They had no idea what was coming, but they were about to find out. And for the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council was afraid. The first strike. The news spread like wildfire across the Galactic Council. Humanity's fleet was no longer just a distant threat. It was at their doorstep. As the first waves of ships entered their territory, the Council members were torn between disbelief and fear. How could humanity, a species they had long dismissed, amass such power? The first question that ran through their minds was simple. Why? Why had humanity waited so long to reveal their strength? And more importantly, what did they want? The Council's most seasoned general, Lord Kor, stood before the holoscreen, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was a battle-hardened warrior who had fought in numerous intergalactic wars, but the size of this fleet was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was immense, larger than some entire star systems. "We need a plan," Lord Kor said, his voice filled with a rare unease. "This isn't just another rebellion. These humans, they've been preparing for something much bigger." The Council's leader, High Chancellor Vrax, watched the screen with a grim expression. The images of the human ships, massive and imposing, dominated the display. The ships were unlike anything the Council had ever encountered before. Their design was sleek, powerful, and terrifying. Unlike the alien fleets, which relied heavily on advanced energy-based weapons, the humans had equipped their ships with heavy armor and brute force. These ships were made for war, and they were headed straight for the heart of the Council's power. "We don't know what they're capable of," Vrax said, his voice cold but betraying an underlying tension. "We've never seen anything like this. Are we certain they even have the technology to wage war on our scale?" A younger member of the Council, an ambitious leader from the Valrath system, leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowed with disdain. "The humans are primitive," he said dismissively. "Their technology is nothing compared to ours. We'll crush them like insects." Lord Kor turned sharply toward the Valrath leader, his eyes narrowing. "Don't be so sure. I've seen human ingenuity before. Underestimate them, and we'll pay the price." The younger leader scoffed, but the others in the room were beginning to take the threat more seriously. Vrax raised a hand to silence the room, his gaze fixed on the holoscreen. "Prepare the fleet for battle," he ordered. "We can't allow them to reach the Council's homeworld." Meanwhile, on Earth, the humans were fully aware that the time had come to make their presence known. Their fleet was now in motion, and the eyes of the galaxy were fixed on them. The first wave of ships, their dreadnoughts brimming with energy and weapons, was preparing for the strike. Humanity wasn't just here to defend their planet. They were here to claim their place in the galaxy. The human fleet was organized into several formations, each ship carrying advanced weaponry and technologies that had been developed in secret over the years. Some ships were equipped with energy shields that could absorb powerful blasts from enemy fire, while others had weapons designed to penetrate even the toughest alien armor. They had made sure to keep their advancements hidden from the galactic community, knowing that the moment their technology was discovered, the Council would do everything in their power to stop them. On board the flagship of humanity's fleet, Admiral Elias Winters stood on the command deck, gazing out at the vastness of space. His face was set in a determined expression, and his mind was focused on the mission at hand. The fate of humanity rested on the success of this strike. "We've trained for this day our whole lives," Winters said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "This is our chance to show the galaxy who we are. Prepare to launch the first wave." His orders were immediately carried out. The fleet began to move forward, each ship synchronizing with the others as they accelerated toward the Council's territory. The first wave of attacks would be a test, a way to see how the Council responded. Humanity needed to know if their tactics, their ships, and their weapons could stand up to the might of the galactic powers. As the first ships neared the Council's defensive perimeter, The tension in the control room was palpable. No one knew how the Council would react, but everyone understood the gravity of the situation. The fate of Earth's fleet, and perhaps the entire human race, depended on the outcome of the next few hours. The moment of truth had arrived. The first volley of fire came from the human ships. Laser beams and missiles shot forward, cutting through space with deadly precision. The human fleet didn't wait for the Council to make the first move. They struck first, unleashing everything they had. The Council's forces responded quickly, but the sheer size and power of the human fleet took them by surprise. They had prepared for a small skirmish, but not this. The first wave of humanity's attack shattered their expectations. It was clear. The humans were no longer the underdogs. They had come to fight. As the battle began, the galaxy would soon learn that humanity was no longer a small, insignificant species. They had come to make their mark on the stars. And the Galactic Council would never be the same. The unexpected resistance. The shockwaves from the initial attack reverberated throughout the Galactic Council. The first volley from humanity's fleet had struck with brutal force, causing serious damage to the perimeter defenses. The Council's forces scrambled to retaliate, but the humans had already proven something crucial. They were not the weak, defenseless species the Council had assumed. They were fierce, organized, and willing to fight for their place in the galaxy. Lord Kor paced back and forth in the command center, his face dark with frustration. "I've seen many battles in my time, but this is something different," he muttered under his breath. His eyes remained glued to the holoscreen, where the results of the first clash were being projected in real time. The human dreadnoughts, massive and imposing, continued to advance, their weapons unleashing wave after wave of destruction. The Council's ships, although powerful in their own right, struggled to keep up with the unexpected force and precision of humanity's tactics. The humans were relentless, and they adapted quickly to every move the Council made. "They're not just throwing themselves at us blindly," Lord Kor observed, his voice low. "They're thinking, adapting, and learning. We need to rethink our strategy." The Galactic Council was used to dominating weaker species, but humanity's response had shattered their assumptions. This wasn't just an isolated skirmish. It was a real fight, one that had the potential to reshape the entire balance of power in the galaxy. High Chancellor Vrax sat quietly, his expression unreadable. He had seen many threats in his time, but nothing like this. Humanity's surprise attack had been far more effective than any of them had expected. He had no doubt that the humans were capable of more than they had shown. This was just the beginning. "Gather the reinforcements," Vrax ordered, his tone hard and commanding. "We need to break this offensive before it escalates. Every fleet in our command should be on high alert." The Council's response was swift, and reinforcements began moving toward the battlefront. But the problem was clear. They were not facing a small resistance. Humanity had organized a full-scale offensive, and they were coming for the Council's heart. Back on Earth, the leaders were watching the battle unfold, their expressions a mixture of pride and determination. Humanity had prepared for this moment, but the real test was just beginning. Admiral Winters stood on the bridge of the flagship, his eyes scanning the data on the screen. The first wave had gone as expected, successful, but now the true fight began. The Council was sending reinforcements, and humanity's ships would need to stand their ground. "Status report," Winters ordered. The chief engineer stepped forward, his face tense but determined. "We've sustained some damage, but nothing we can't handle. The fleet's shields are holding, and our weapons are fully operational." Winters nodded, his gaze sharp. "We knew this wouldn't be easy, but we've come too far to back down now." He turned toward his communications officer. "Prepare the next wave. Let's show them what humanity is capable of." The humans weren't just defending their planet. They were fighting for survival. For too long they had been underestimated, dismissed as a primitive species. But now, they had proven that they were more than capable of holding their own against the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, and they weren't about to stop. As the Council's reinforcements moved into position, the humans were ready. The next wave of the battle was set to begin, and both sides knew that this confrontation could decide the fate of the galaxy. Meanwhile, the Council's leaders were becoming increasingly desperate. They had underestimated the human threat from the beginning, and now it seemed that their very survival was at risk. They had sent their best fleets, their most powerful ships, but the human resistance showed no signs of faltering. "How long can they keep this up?" one of the council members asked, voice tinged with doubt. Vrax looked over the data once more, his eyes narrowing. The truth was, he didn't know. Humanity had already proven that they were more than a match for the Council's forces, and now they were pressing forward with relentless determination. Their weapons were devastating, their tactics unpredictable, and their sheer will to fight unmatched. "We need to change the game," Vrax said, his voice sharp with command. "We'll deploy our full force. No more holding back." The Council's forces moved into position, their fleets converging on the human fleet. This was the moment, the final push to break the human resistance and restore their control. But as the Council prepared for the decisive battle, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were facing something they had never encountered before. Something human. As the battle raged on, humanity's forces refused to retreat. The human fleet had proven their resilience, and now they were pushing the Council's forces to their limit. The battle was no longer just a fight for dominance. It was a fight for survival, and humanity was determined to show the galaxy that they would not be silenced. The Galactic Council had never faced an enemy like this before. They had no idea what was coming next, but they were about to find out. Humanity was here to stay. This section adds intensity to the battle, showing humanity's resilience and the growing desperation of the Galactic Council. It sets up the next phase of the conflict while continuing to build suspense. Let me know if you'd like any changes or further adjustments. The turning point. The battle in the vast emptiness of space had become a chaotic dance of destruction. Humanity's fleet, once dismissed as a fledgling force, had become an unstoppable juggernaut, pushing the Galactic Council's forces to the edge. For the first time in centuries, the Council was forced to reconsider its own superiority. Lord Kor's face was grim as he watched the unfolding battle. Ships under his command were being destroyed faster than he could issue orders. The human dreadnoughts were resilient, more powerful than anything he had ever encountered. What was worse, they seemed to be learning from every encounter, adapting their tactics with each new move the Council made. "These humans are something else," Kor muttered to himself. His usual confidence had been replaced by a deep unease. They fight like they have nothing to lose. How are they so organized? So determined? Vrax's face hardened as the damage reports continued to pour in. The Council's ships were faltering, and the reinforcements they had hoped would turn the tide were being picked off one by one. The human ships, while not as technologically advanced in some areas, had shown an unexpected advantage in sheer strategic ingenuity. Their attack strategies were not only effective but tailored to counter every move the Council made. "Lord Kor," Vrax said, his voice heavy with frustration, "we need to end this. The Council's reputation is at stake. Send in the Death Star fleet. If the humans wish to fight, we will show them what real power looks like." Kor hesitated, eyeing the console that displayed the location of the fleet's most powerful units. The Death Star fleet was an ancient fleet designed for total annihilation, a relic of an era when the Council ruled without challenge. Kor knew that unleashing it would be the last step in the battle, but something in his gut told him it would not be enough to stop the human onslaught. On Earth, the human fleet's command center was alive with activity. The ships had been locked in battle for hours, but Admiral Winters remained calm, even in the face of overwhelming odds. His eyes flicked from one console to another, the strategic map of the battlefield unfolding before him. Despite the chaos, the fleet had managed to keep a steady advantage. "We've got them on the ropes," Winters muttered, his voice laced with quiet confidence. "Just a little longer, and we'll turn the tide for good." But even as he spoke, the Council's new wave of reinforcements, led by the formidable Death Star fleet, began to emerge from the depths of space. Winters watched the screen as the massive ships appeared, bigger, more powerful, and more menacing than anything humanity had ever faced. The Council was bringing out their trump card, and for the first time since the start of the war, Winters felt the weight of the challenge ahead. "Deploy the second wave," Winters ordered, his voice steady. "We're not backing down now." The second wave was humanity's last gamble. The ships were smaller, faster, and equipped with powerful new weapons that had been developed in secret. They weren't designed to fight the Death Star fleet head-on, but they could do what was needed: distract, disrupt, and hopefully destroy. The first volley of fire from the human ships lit up the space around them. Missiles streaked through the dark void, launching toward the incoming Council fleet. The human ships weren't as large, but they moved with a swiftness that the Council's forces hadn't anticipated. The Death Star fleet, despite its formidable firepower, found itself facing an entirely different kind of enemy. The humans were relentless, hitting hard and fast, overwhelming the Council's ships in a series of small but devastating attacks. As the battle continued, Kor's frustration reached its peak. "This cannot be happening," he muttered. "We have the power of the galaxy's greatest fleet at our command, and yet we cannot defeat them. How?" His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp beeping sound from the command console. A fleet-wide communication was being broadcast to all ships. Vrax's voice echoed across the fleet. "We will not be defeated by these humans. This ends now. Launch the Death Star fleet's final strike. If we cannot destroy them, we will make them fear us." Kor's eyes widened as the orders were transmitted. The Death Star fleet was preparing to unleash its full power, a devastating weapon designed to wipe entire planets off the map in an instant. On the human side, Winters was watching the unfolding situation with a critical eye. His officers were working overtime to keep the fleet intact, but they all knew the truth. This next attack from the Council could be the end of their fight. "Admiral," one of his officers said urgently, "the Death Star fleet is preparing a massive strike. We're too close to their position. If we don't do something now, they'll wipe us out." Winters stood still, his mind racing. He had only one chance to stop the Council's final assault. His eyes darted to the control panel, where his finger hovered above a button. "We launch everything," he said decisively. "All ships fire everything. We can't stop them one at a time. We'll hit them all." With that, the second wave of humanity's fleet opened fire in an all-out barrage. Missiles, energy blasts, and laser beams shot toward the Death Star fleet at once, overwhelming its defensive shields and striking with unprecedented force. The first salvo exploded against one of the Death Star fleet's largest ships, causing a massive eruption of light and fire. The galactic battlefield, once dominated by the Council's power, was now in chaos. The humans had managed to push back the Council's most powerful fleet, and now it was unclear whether the Council could recover. The turning point had arrived. The final stand. The battle raged on, but it was clear to both sides that the outcome was now uncertain. The Death Star fleet, once thought to be an unstoppable force, had met its match in the relentless firepower of humanity's fleet. The Council's ships were scattered, their once mighty presence reduced to burning wreckage and desperate attempts at escape. Lord Kor stood in the command center of the Council's flagship, staring out at the chaos unfolding before him. His mind raced with one thought: how had they been outmaneuvered by these humans? He had expected their fleet to break apart under the weight of the Council's power, but instead, humanity had fought back with a ferocity he had never imagined. The Death Star fleet's once proud ships were beginning to falter, their shields failing one by one as the human fleet continued its barrage. Kor's fists clenched, the frustration growing inside him. He had seen countless battles, but never had he encountered an enemy like this. The humans were not just fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. "Lord Kor," a subordinate said, his voice trembling, The human fleet is not backing down. They've taken down half of the Death Star fleet's ships. What should we do? Kor's eyes flicked to the tactical display. It was clear that the Council's forces were not just losing, they were being overwhelmed. The humans were relentless, and despite their smaller fleet, they were fighting with everything they had. Their tactics had been unpredictable, and their coordination flawless. They had adapted to every move the Council had made. And now they were driving the Council's ships to the brink of annihilation. This cannot be, Kor muttered. He had underestimated the humans, and now it was too late. The Council was on the verge of defeat, and he could do nothing to stop it. Meanwhile, on the human side, Admiral Winters was standing in the command center of Earth's flagship, the Valiant. His eyes were focused on the screen as it displayed the ongoing battle. The Death Star fleet was falling, but so was their fleet. The human ships, though smaller and fewer in number, had taken heavy casualties. Winters knew they couldn't keep this up forever. The Council's forces were massive, and their weapons more advanced. "Admiral," one of his officers said, "we've got a report from the front lines. The Death Star fleet is retreating. The Council's ships are trying to regroup." Winters nodded, but his mind was already calculating the next move. If the Council retreated, this would be humanity's moment. The human fleet was weakened, but they still had one advantage. The Council's forces were broken. Now they had to strike before the Council could recover. "Prepare the fleet," Winters ordered. "We move in. Full speed ahead. If we let them regroup, we lose our chance." The human ships moved with purpose, gathering together in a formation that would allow them to strike the Council's forces before they had a chance to escape. The moment was critical. If they didn't finish this now, they would face a much stronger, regrouped Council fleet. This was humanity's final stand. But just as the human fleet advanced, a new signal appeared on their screens. A massive ship, unlike anything they had seen before, emerged from the far side of the battlefield. It was a weapon of unimaginable power, larger than any of the Death Star fleet's ships, and it was heading straight for the human fleet. "Admiral, what is that?" an officer asked, his voice filled with dread. Winters' eyes narrowed. The ship wasn't just large, it was enormous, its dark silhouette casting a shadow over the remaining Council forces. The ship was flanked by several smaller vessels, all designed for one thing: to decimate everything in their path. "That's their last resort," Winters said grimly. "It's the Council's flagship, the Nemesis. They've brought in their ultimate weapon." The Nemesis was the most powerful ship in the Council's fleet, a ship designed for complete destruction. It was equipped with weapons capable of erasing entire planets. The mere sight of it sent a wave of fear through the human fleet. This was the Council's final gamble, and if it succeeded, humanity would be finished. "Prepare for impact," Winters ordered. "We have no choice. We fight until the last ship is standing." The human fleet accelerated toward the Nemesis, determined to give it everything they had. The space around them was filled with flashing lights and exploding debris as both sides opened fire. The humans were pushing forward, their ships weaving and dodging through enemy fire, while the Council's ships focused their fire on the advancing fleet. But despite their best efforts, the Nemesis was closing in, its weapons charging for a final blast. The human fleet had no choice but to make one last push, one last stand against a force far beyond their own capabilities. "Admiral, we can't hold out much longer," an officer shouted. "The Nemesis is preparing to fire." Winters looked around at the faces of his crew, seeing the same determination reflected in their eyes. They had come so far, and they were not about to give up now. "Hold steady," Winters shouted. "We fight for Earth. We fight for humanity." The battle reached its climax, both sides locked in a desperate struggle for survival. The outcome of the war would be decided in these final moments. Would humanity's fleet be crushed by the might of the Nemesis, or would they defy the odds and defeat the Council once and for all? The answer was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The human counterattack. The Nemesis loomed large in the distance, its dark silhouette casting an ominous shadow over the battlefield. As the Council flagship charged up its immense weapons, ready to strike, the human fleet had only one option left: to counterattack with everything they had. Admiral Winters stood tall in the command center of the Valiant, his eyes fixed on the giant warship. The tension in the air was thick. He could feel the weight of the situation. The Nemesis was unstoppable, and if they didn't act quickly, humanity's fleet would be wiped out in an instant. "Admiral, the Nemesis is targeting us," an officer yelled from across the room. Winters didn't flinch. Instead, he gave his orders with deadly focus. "All ships, evasive maneuvers. We'll need to outsmart it, not just fight it head-on." The crew of the Valiant moved with precise coordination. The human fleet, though battered and bruised, had the advantage of unpredictability and speed. The ships scattered in all directions, dodging the powerful beams of the Nemesis, each maneuver creating a flicker of hope that they might just survive this fight. The Nemesis fired a devastating beam, but the humans were ready. The fleet split, some ships moving high, others low, and the laser sliced through the emptiness where they had just been. The human ships had been agile enough to avoid the blast, but it was clear they couldn't keep dodging forever. The Nemesis would tire them out, and they needed a plan. "We can't keep this up, Admiral," another officer shouted. "We're running out of time." Winters knew he had to act fast. There was only one thing left to do. They had to get close. Close enough to use their limited firepower to strike at the heart of the Nemesis, its central reactor. The human fleet may have been outclassed in firepower, but their ingenuity was their strength. They had been forced to use unconventional tactics to survive. And now, it was time to gamble everything on one final move. "Prepare the boarding teams," Winters ordered, his voice steady, but filled with urgency. "We're going in." The crew stared at him in disbelief. Boarding the Nemesis was a death sentence. No human could survive against the Council's elite warriors on board that ship. Yet, in the face of destruction, there was no other choice. "Get to your stations," Winters barked. "We're going to do what they never thought we could. We're going to fight on their turf." The human ships began to form into a tight formation, their hulls nearly touching. The Nemesis fired again, but this time, the human fleet didn't scatter. Instead, they surged forward together, a mass of ships making a final charge for the flagship. "Braced for impact," Winters warned as the fleet hurtled toward their target. The Nemesis fired once more, but the humans kept their course steady, weaving through the shots in perfect unison. The human fleet was closing in. The Nemesis was starting to feel the pressure. It was a war of attrition now. Speed, agility, and cunning versus sheer firepower. The humans had one advantage the Council had not anticipated: their refusal to back down. The Nemesis fired again, and this time, one of the human ships took the brunt of the blast. The Valiant rocked violently, its shields flickering. Crew members scrambled to stabilize the ship, but Winters kept his eyes focused on the tactical map. They had almost made it. "Now," Winters shouted, and the human ships launched their final assault. They dove headfirst toward the Nemesis, targeting its weakest points: the exhaust ports, the shield generators, the power conduits. They were risking everything to destroy this weapon of mass destruction. On board the Valiant, Winters could feel the gravity of the moment. It wasn't just about victory or defeat. It was about survival. Humanity had shown that they could not only hold their ground but fight with a resilience that the Council could not understand. "We're through," an officer yelled as the human ships broke through the outer defenses of the Nemesis. They were inside now, and the heart of the beast was in sight. The human fleet launched their final attack on the central reactor of the Nemesis, and as the energy blasts hit their mark, the flagship shuddered. The Nemesis began to crack. Explosions rocked its hull, and the once mighty Council flagship was now a sinking beast. The tide was turning, but the battle was far from over. The Nemesis continued to fight back, But the human fleet had one last surprise. With the Council flagship falling apart, the human fleet executed a bold maneuver. The remaining ships pulled back, gathering their forces for a final salvo. They had weakened the flagship, and now it was time to finish the job. Winters ordered a final strike, and the human ships let loose everything they had. Lasers, missiles, and torpedoes rained down on the Nemesis, ripping apart its defenses. The once unstoppable force now found itself fighting for its life. And just as it seemed that the Nemesis would survive, its massive reactor core began to collapse. The explosion sent shockwaves through the battlefield, and the Nemesis disintegrated in a blinding flash of light. The Council flagship was no more. Silence fell over the battlefield. The Council's forces, now leaderless and broken, began to retreat. The human fleet, battered and burned, had emerged victorious. The fight was far from over, but the galaxy had seen a message that would echo for ages to come. Humanity was not a force to be underestimated. They had just proven that no enemy, no matter how powerful, could ever break them. The aftermath and new dawn. The battlefield lay silent, save for the distant echoes of destruction and the remnants of a battle that had shaken the galaxy to its core. The once proud Nemesis, a symbol of the Galactic Council's power, was nothing more than debris scattered across space. Its collapse sent a shockwave throughout the Council's forces. The humans had done the unthinkable. Admiral Winters stood aboard the Valiant, watching the shattered remnants of the enemy flagship float in the emptiness. The victory was hard-earned, but it was complete. The Council had underestimated humanity, and now it was too late. "We've done it," Winters muttered to himself, though the weight of the victory didn't immediately set in. The silence of the battlefield was deafening. He had led the charge, but now, as the reality of their success sank in, the true cost of the battle became clear. The human fleet had taken severe damage, and many ships had been lost in the final push. Yet, against all odds, humanity had survived. "Admiral, we have a transmission coming in," the communications officer called out. Winters looked up, his gaze shifting to the holographic screen. It was a message from the Galactic Council. The message flickered on the screen, its tone cold and calculating, as if the Council still didn't fully comprehend the scope of their loss. A high-ranking official appeared, his face stern, his eyes betraying the shock of the situation. "You have won this battle, humans," the Council representative said. "But do not mistake this as a sign of your victory. The Council will not forget what you have done. The galaxy will not forget. This is only the beginning. We will return. And next time, you will not survive." The message ended abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Winters stared at the empty screen, a mix of emotions rushing through him. He had expected a message like this. The Council, though defeated, was not known for its humility. They would regroup, rebuild, and come back stronger. The war was far from over. But for now, humanity had won an important victory. The Council had learned that humans were not to be underestimated, and that lesson would be felt throughout the galaxy. He turned to his crew. "Prepare for the next steps. We've shown them what we're capable of, but there's still work to be done. We need to rebuild, to protect our home. We've taken the first step, but the fight is far from over." The crew members nodded in agreement. The victory was sweet, but the war was not won yet. The message from the Council was a grim reminder that the road ahead would be long and dangerous. Humanity had survived this battle, but what about the next one? As the Valiant moved away from the wreckage of the Nemesis, the crew could only wonder what the future held. They had broken the Council's hold on the galaxy, but at what cost? Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. Humanity had taken a bold stand, and the victory had sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The world had watched as their ships fought and triumphed against an enemy that had once seemed unbeatable. Humanity had taken its first steps toward becoming a force to be reckoned with, and the future looked uncertain but full of potential. In the days that followed, humanity began to rebuild its fleet, but now with a new sense of purpose. The knowledge that they had defeated the Council was a powerful motivator, and humanity had proven that they could not only survive, but thrive in the face of overwhelming odds. Admiral Winters watched as the human fleet prepared for the next phase. The battle was not over, but the first victory was theirs, and it was a victory that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. Humanity was no longer a weak, helpless species. They had risen against the odds, and now the galaxy would know them as a force to be reckoned with. Next time, Winters said quietly to himself, "We will be ready."